It's funny how the things we think we know best can still surprise us. Take Psalm 1, for example. It's practically a greatest hit of ancient wisdom, but we're about to uncover some hidden depths you might not expect.
It's amazing how a fresh perspective can make even the most familiar text come alive.
Exactly. And our guide today is Augustine of Hippo,
Yeah.
a real theological heavyweight. And he had a knack for finding symbolism in unexpected places. We're diving into his expositions on the Psalms to see Psalm 1 through his eyes.
Augustine's insights into the psalm are particularly fascinating because he saw it as a powerful reflection on the life of Jesus.
Okay, so we're not talking about just generic life advice here. This is next level stuff.
Yeah.
And it starts right from the first line, blessed is the man. Now, most people would read that as a general principle, right?
You think so. But Augustine went deeper. He believed this blessed man was a direct reference to Jesus. He saw the entire psalm as a kind of veiled portrait of Christ.
Wow. Talk about reading between the lines. What led him to that conclusion, though?
Well, think about it. Jesus embodies that description of the blessed man who resists temptation. He faced those challenges head on, yet never gave in.
True. But it wasn't just about resisting the bad stuff, was it? Augustine also saw a connection to Jesus rejecting earthly power, right?
Exactly. Remember how Jesus was offered rulership, a kingdom of this world? He could have had it all but refused. He wasn't swayed by ambition or the counsel of the ungodly. That, for Augustine, was a major clue.
So it's not just about avoiding bad behavior, but about aligning your desires with God's will. Which brings us to that line about delighting in God's law. I have to admit, that doesn't exactly scream beach read to me. How did Augustine interpret that?
Right, it's not about becoming a legal scholar. Augustine made a key distinction between being in the law versus under the law.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the difference?
Being under the law implies being controlled by it, weighed down by rules. But being in the law, as Augustine saw it, is about internalizing its wisdom. It's about that deep, abiding joy you find when your heart aligns with God's will.
So it's less about checking boxes and more about genuine love for God guiding your actions.
Precisely. And that's where the true delight comes in. It's the joy of living in sync with something bigger than yourself.
I think that's something we all crave, even if we don't always get it right. It's that longing for our life to reflect something true, something beyond just our own desires.
And for Augustine, that something bigger was ultimately rooted in the love and wisdom of God.
Which brings us to the imagery in Psalm 1.3, where the righteous are compared to a tree planted by streams of water. It's such a peaceful, almost idyllic picture.
It is, and Augustine found layers upon layers of meaning in that single image.
Oh, I bet he did. I'm ready for the Augustine deep dive. What did he see in that tree?
On one level, he saw it as representing Jesus himself, drawing nourishment and strength from the Holy Spirit, symbolized by the flowing water. But here's where it gets really interesting.
I knew there had to be a twist.
Augustine also saw those streams of water as representing the sins of humanity.
Hold on, the sins of humanity are nourishing the tree. That seems a bit counterintuitive, to say the least.
It does, doesn't it? But Augustine's point was that even our mistakes, our brokenness, our constant need for forgiveness, these things played a role in Jesus' spiritual growth. It's as if he drew strength from our very humanness.
That's an incredible thought. So even though those imperfections separate us from God, they were part of what allowed Jesus to bridge that gap.
That's the beauty of Augustine's interpretation. He saw even our darkest moments as potential sources of spiritual growth, both for ourselves and for Jesus.
It's almost like, in Augustine's view, our need for God, even in our failings, becomes a testament to his grace.
Exactly. It highlights the transformative power of God's love.
It's like those imperfections become part of the story of redemption.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that God can work through anything, even our flaws, to bring about something good. But this idea of drawing strength from unexpected sources also applies to the ungodly, those who are not rooted in God. They get a less idyllic comparison in Psalm 1, don't they?
It's how to put it mildly. They're described as dust, which the wind casts forth. Not exactly a picture of stability.
No, not at all. And Augustine doesn't see them as just being blown around aimlessly. He points to a specific force that uproots them: pride.
Pride. The ultimate downfall. So it's not just that they're tempted, but that they lack the grounding to resist it because they think they don't need to.
Precisely. They're like those trees without roots, susceptible to every gust of wind. Augustine believed that pride makes us think we are self-sufficient, that we don't need God, and that he argued is what ultimately leads to our downfall.
It's so true, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
How often have we gotten ourselves into trouble because we were too proud to ask for help or too stubborn to admit we were wrong? Pride really does have a way of tripping us up.
It's a universal human struggle, that temptation to go it alone, to believe we have all the answers. But what Augustine reminds us is that true strength comes from acknowledging our need for God. It's about humility, recognizing that we are not the center of the universe.
It's about staying grounded in something larger than ourselves. Which makes me think about that other image in Psalm 1, the ungodly being like chaff that the wind drives away. How does that connect to this idea of pride?
Augustine ties it back to that same idea of being rooted in God. Think of a deeply rooted tree. It can withstand almost any storm, but the ungodly, without that deep connection, are easily scattered.
So it's not just that they're blown away by temptation, but that they don't have the internal fortitude to resist it. They lack that strong foundation.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Augustine doesn't see this as a punishment, but almost as a natural consequence. If you're not drawing life from the source, you'll inevitably wither away.
It's like trying to build a house on sand. It might look okay for a while, but the first storm will wash it away.
That's a great analogy. You need that solid bedrock to build something that lasts.
Okay, so we've talked about the blessedness of the righteous and the fleeting nature of the ungodly, but then we get to that part about judgment. Psalm 1.5 says, "The ungodly shall not stand in the judgment." It sounds pretty final.
It's definitely a powerful image and one that's easy to misunderstand. Augustine didn't see it as God being unaware of or unconcerned with the wicked. His interpretation was much more nuanced.
So it's not that God turns a blind eye to their actions.
Not at all. Remember, Augustine was a deep thinker. He was grappling with something much more profound about the nature of God and existence itself.
Okay, I'm ready for my mind to be blown. Give me the Augustine version.
Augustine believed that God's knowing is about more than just having information. It's about an active, life-giving presence. To be known by God is to exist in a real and lasting way.
So it's not just that God is aware of something, but that something is sustained by God's very being.
Exactly. And that's where the ungodly, according to Augustine, ultimately face their consequence. By choosing to separate themselves from God, they cut themselves off from the source of true life.
It's like they're choosing to fade away to no longer exist in a meaningful sense.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it leads us right into the final thought-provoking verse of Psalm 1.
That verse that says, "For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish." It's powerful stuff. And Augustine didn't see that as a simple statement of fact, did he?
No, he saw layers of meaning there, too. Remember how we were talking about God's knowing being an active, sustaining force?
Right. It's not just about God observing, it's about God giving life.
Exactly. So when the psalm says, "The way of the ungodly shall perish," Augustine interpreted that as saying anything not aligned with God, anything not sustained by that divine love and presence ultimately can't endure. It's not punishment, but a natural consequence of being disconnected from the source of life.
Wow. It's a profound idea, and it makes you think about what truly lasts. If being known by God means having that kind of eternal existence, what in our lives reflects that lasting knowledge? What choices can we make to build something that endures?
It's a question worth considering, isn't it? We started with the simple psalm, but through Augustine's lens, we're grappling with the very nature of existence, what it means to truly be in the most profound sense.
It's like Augustine took this ancient text and revealed its relevance for us today. We may not be 4th century theologians, but these ideas feel incredibly timely. I mean, think about it. We're constantly bombarded with information, with pressure to achieve, to build our own little kingdoms. It's so easy to fall into that trap of pride. Augustine talked about thinking we have to do it all ourselves, that we don't need anyone, even God.
And that's precisely why Augustine's interpretation of Psalm 1 feels so important even now. In a world that often feels scattered and uncertain, it reminds us that true strength, true fulfillment, comes from rooting ourselves in something larger than ourselves.
From acknowledging that we weren't meant to go through this life alone.
Exactly. It's about staying connected to that source of life, that living water of God's presence, even maybe especially when we mess up. Remember the tree drawing strength from those streams?
Right. Our imperfections, our need for forgiveness. It's all part of what allows us to connect more deeply with God.
It's about aligning our hearts with God's will, not out of obligation, but out of love. It's in that relationship, that connection, that we find the true blessedness Psalm 1 describes.
It's not about being perfect, but about continually returning to that source of love and wisdom. It's a powerful message. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Psalm 1, I'm left with this question for our listeners. What in your life reflects that kind of lasting knowledge? What are you building that will withstand the test of time, that's so deeply rooted in something beyond yourself that it can't help but endure? It's something to ponder, isn't it?
It certainly is, and maybe the answers will surprise us.
That's the beauty of seeking, of questioning, of diving deep. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of Psalm 1. Until next time, keep exploring.